I know so many of us love those heist movies and maybe the mafia movies and all that sort of stuff. And it just feels like such a different world, doesn't it? And I think that's sort of the appeal of that. There's something to do with money. We all have something around that, I understand. But there's also this idea of it. It's just this sort of mystical place. Well, we're going to hear today that maybe it's not as mystical as we think, and it certainly doesn't provide the purpose and the hope in life that is desired for every human soul. We're going to hear from former mafia boss on the Towards Understanding podcast today, Michael Franzese, about his remarkable journey and his life into a relationship with Jesus as well. Just before we get there, would you like, rate, review, give us a 5-star rating if you love the podcast. It helps us get it out to more people. Let's get stuck into this conversation with Michael. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael.
Thank you, Clayton. Good to be here.
Michael, for somebody who perhaps doesn't know a bit about your story, could you take us back to a life far different from now? You've had an encounter with Jesus, with God, and life has changed, but it wasn't always that case. Can you take us back to sort of growing up and then finding yourself in the middle of the mob?
Well, yeah, my dad, Clayton, was the underboss of the Colombo crime family, one of the 5 New York Mafia La Cosa Nostra families, and that's back in the 60s. And he was a pretty powerful position in that life. He was very high profile, always a major target of law enforcement and, of the media also. So I kind of grew up in that atmosphere where my dad was always a major target. We always had law enforcement people around us, and, in my view, they were looking to harass him and harass her family. So I grew up with this kind of, hatred of law enforcement and the government and agents and all of that. And, originally my dad didn't want this life for me. He wanted me to go to school, get an education, have a career, maybe be a doctor. And I was on that road until he got in some very serious trouble. He was indicted several times. And after a few acquittals in state court, he was eventually convicted in federal court for masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies. And he was sentenced in 1967 to 50 years in prison. In 1970, he was shipped off to Leavenworth Penitentiary to do his time, and that's a major institution in facility, I should say, in Kansas City. And I was a pre-med student. I was going to be a doctor. I was devastated when my dad went away because I was very close with him. He was kind of my idol growing up, and Joe Colombo was the boss of our family at that time, and I was very close with him and his family. And he took me under his wing. I started to meet a lot of my dad's friends, and they kind of said, Mike, if you don't help your father out, he's going to die in prison. And I lost interest in school, went to see him in the penitentiary. We sat in the visiting room and told him, Dad, I'm not going to school anymore. If I don't help you out, you're going to die in here. And after a pretty serious discussion in which he wasn't all that happy at first, but he kind of gave up, realizing that, I was pretty headstrong as a kid. My mind was made up. I had to help him. And he said, okay, if you're going to be on the street, son, then I need you to be on the street in the right way. And, Clayton, he asked me a question that kind of threw me for a minute. One question. He said, Mike, if you ever had to kill anybody, would you do it? And I thought about it. It wasn't something I took lightly, even back then at, 21, 22 years old. And I thought about it, and I said, you know what, Dad? I think under the right circumstances, I could do it. And he said to me, that's the right answer. He said, go home, somebody will be in touch with you. You just do whatever you're told. And that was the only instruction he really gave me. It's kind of on-the-job training at that point. So he proposed me into membership in the life. I went to see the boss. Joe Colombo had been shot. He was seriously wounded. He eventually died from the wounds. And I sat with the new boss, who's also passed on now. His name was Tom DeBella. And he said, Mike, from now on, 24/7, you're on call to serve this family. And that means if your mother is sick and dying and you're at her bedside and we call you to service, you leave your mother, you come and serve us. From now on, we're number one in your life before anything and everything. And they said, when you prove yourself, when we believe you deserve this privilege to become a member, we'll let you know. For about a year and a half, I was in kind of a recruiting period where I had to do anything and everything I was told to do to prove myself worthy. After about a year and a half, I did that. And on Halloween night here in the States, I don't know if you celebrate that there, but it's in October of the year. I went in with 5 other gentlemen, and we all took an oath and became made members of the Colombo family. And that's how it all started for me. So I officially became a member of life in 1975.
Yeah. So 1975, that that occurs and starts from there, you quickly had an enormous influence. In fact, one of the, I'm sort of inverted commas, the high points of what you achieved in that was the ability in the end to generate enormous amounts of money for a whole lot of, activities for, the mafia in that sense as well. I mean, we're talking millions and millions each week, right?
Well, yeah, Clayton, I was fortunate. You come into the life, you come in as a soldier, and, you got to prove yourself in that life as to what you're capable of doing. Some guys are around doing, a lot of the grunt work, I would say, and they're not real earners. And other guys kind of, establish themselves in that regard. And I was fortunate. I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business. I was very aggressive on the street. I worked hard, and I brought some new things into the family that they had never done before. And as a result, we generated, tremendous amount of money. And in 1980, the boss of my family, who's now doing life in prison, he was convicted on the Mafia Commission case in 86. He made me a capo regime. He said, "Mike, you're doing a great job, and I'm going to appoint you as a captain or a capo regime." And from 1980 until 95, when I consider myself removed from that life, I operated in that capacity. And, I did enjoy a lot of success on the street, but, with that, I became a major target of law enforcement myself, and, went through several indictments and so on and so forth. So, I had it going from both sides, but this was my life. It's who I was, and you deal with it.
You went to prison, you, as you said, indicted in that regards too. Could I get your mindset at that time, I suppose, of the worth of life? I think it's probably a fair bit different to now. We might ask that question a bit later of where you sit from now. But going through that, being chased by cops all the time, living this life where, it was dangerous. There was, I suppose, a real adrenaline running through you the whole time as well. What was the worth of life, the point of life for you in those moments?
Well, it's almost like it was second nature to me. You worry about things on the street because, unfortunately, Clayton, I've seen more guys, get killed and, make mistakes in that life and do things that that just got them in a lot of trouble. So I knew that was always, a concern for all of us. You make a mistake in that life, you can pay dearly. And, for me, it was a double-edged sword because the more money you're making, the higher your profile, the faster you rise in the ranks. There's resentment from some. There's, other people are wishing you well. So it goes both ways. You got to watch yourself. I had a big crew, and I had a lot of people looking at me in different ways. So, there's that to be concerned with. And then, law enforcement, like I said, I became so high profile. My dad was high profile, and it just, when I started to get some success, it came right on me. So I had it on both sides, and my mindset was, I don't know, it's almost robotic. It's, hey, this is your life. You got to deal with. You take one day at a time, and you move forward. And I had such a, I guess you got to say, a hatred for the government at that time because I felt that they what they did to my dad was unjust, and I grew up with that mentality that they were the bad guys. So that's how I dealt with it. And for a long time, it was rough, but like I said, it was my life. So I didn't think of it in those terms. I just said, this is normal for me. It was my normal.
So a couple of things that you were doing, I've been reading a bit more, whether it's, there was some sort of bootlegging on some, fuel prices, these sorts of things, but there was sort of random sort of standover tactics of various things for concert tours perhaps, or things like that. Is that a fair sort of assessment of some of the other things that were going on?
Well, I was involved in so many things. I had control of a number of unions, at my disposal. I was in the contracting business. I got involved in entertainment and sports, along with this gasoline tax, deal that I put together. It was really a deal where we defrauded the government out of tax on every gallon of gasoline. And that's where the major income come. I mean, from that alone, I was generating almost $10 million a week. Oh. So, it was heavy money. And, I had my own jet plane. I had a helicopter. I had houses all over the country. And, at the age of 31, I had gotten to a pretty high level. And at the same time, as a result of that, I met with a lot of people. I had run-ins with John Gotti, even though I knew John well. I met with a lot of the bosses at the time who wanted to get involved in some of the things that I was doing. So that's why my profile, just rise so high so fast, because when the money comes in, that's what happens. People recognize you, they notice you, and they want to be involved or they want to get you. It's one of the two. Yeah. So, I was doing a lot of things. I mean, I had money on the street. I was lending money at usurious rates. I had 12 bookmakers that were, under my control. And we had a lot of athletes betting with us. Some of them would compromise the outcome of a game as a result of a debt that they got into when they couldn't pay us. So, in a short time, I covered a lot of ground. I guess that's the best way to put it.
So here's the remarkable thing that I think there's two truly remarkable moments in your story from here too, is that, here you are so entrenched in this, you're heading up so many people, you're captain of many crews, many people working for you, as you said, and yet there's two remarkable things. One, I think you had this encounter with, a God who loves you, and it changed you. I want to hear about that. And also, you actually left the mob, which just doesn't happen. So could you take us through the order of how they occurred? Did they intersect together? Were they separate parts of that story? These two incredible life changes for you. Could you take us through that?
Well, sure. Among many things I was doing back then, I was making movies. I had a production company, and I was making films at that time. I was executive producing them, and I was funding them. And I had my own distribution company where we were actually bringing them to the theaters and on video and in the foreign markets. And Smokey Robinson was a friend of mine, and he came to me with a screenplay for a breakdance movie back in the 80s. It was very popular, breakdancing was. He came to me with a musical, and dance movie, and we filmed it in Florida, and I brought in a number of dancers to work in the film, and I brought in the cast and crew from L.A. to work in the film. And it was on that set that I met this 20-year-old girl. She was a dancer in my film. And honestly, Clayton, she was gorgeous. I mean, that's what attracted me first. It was her looks. And I started to date her. At first, she didn't want anything to do with me, but I pursued her, and I started to date her a bit during the production. And, I fell in love with her. And she was a very strong person of faith. I mean, she was a strong Christian. Her mother was a strong Christian. And I didn't buy into it at all at that time. That was the last thing I really wanted to hear, but I respected their beliefs. And when it came to a point where I said, I really want this woman in my life, but she could never accept my lifestyle. She didn't even know really anything about it. She was from California. She never heard really anything about the mob and the mafia. They don't have any mafia out in California where she came from. And so, but I realized I needed to make some changes. Now, of course, at that point in time, I'm deeply entrenched in the mob. I'm mob guy all the way. This is who I was. But I made this choice to try to have this girl in my life. And as a result of that, I knew I'd have to make a move and try to get out of the life. So, I had a plan. I took a plea for a 10-year prison sentence. I had beaten the government so many times. I knew that they'd want to get a conviction on me. So I had negotiating power with them because they really wanted me. And so I negotiated for a 10-year prison sentence, a $15 million restitution. I had $5 million in forfeitures on top of that, my assets. And I figured I'd do a couple of years in prison because, on 10, maybe you do 5 back then. And when I got out of prison, I'd move out to California and have parole and probation. And when you're on parole here in the States, you're not allowed to communicate or be in contact with anybody from the street. So I figured I can use that as an excuse not to meet with anybody. And maybe after 10 or 12 years, the guys in New York would forget about me. I'd live happily ever after in California. Well, it didn't work out that way, and I always say this God had a different plan for my life, like he does for so many of us. And what started to happen is it became public that I was walking away. And when that happened, really all heck broke loose for me. I mean, the boss of my family, immediate contract on my life. My father, unfortunately, went along with the contract, and so I had some real issues to deal with on the street. The FBI came to me in prison and said, Mike, basically you're a dead man anyway. The word is all over the street from our informants. They wanted me to cooperate and put me in the witness protection program, but I didn't want to do that. That's not where my head was at. I wasn't looking to hurt anybody, so I resisted that. And for the 5 years I did first in prison, they really gave me a hard time. They put a lot of pressure on me. They moved me to all these different institutions in the country trying to get me to break. And fortunately, we got through that struggle. And it was during that time that, I started to get closer to the Lord because my mother and my mother-in-law and my wife were working on me. And, initially for me, hey, it sounds good. My sins will be forgiven and I'm trying to become a good guy now and change my life. Maybe this will work out. But, I can't really say that it really penetrated. I was very serious about it. It wasn't until, a second encounter. I was out on parole for 13 months. after the 5 years I did in prison. And it was really a very difficult time. I mean, Clayton, I was literally dodging bullets. I couldn't put a house in my name. I couldn't put utilities in my name. There were people out to get me. The FBI was putting tremendous pressure on me. It was very difficult for me to earn a living. My wife was scared out of her mind every time I left the house. We had two little babies, infants at that point in time, and it was just really a rough time. Well, like a fool, I violated my parole. I fell into a trap. I violated my parole. And when I did, the government, they had it out. They really had it for me because I wouldn't cooperate. Basically, they took every penny that I had. They gave me another 4 years in prison, and they kept me locked down for 3 years. I was in a hole. I was in a 6x8 cell,
wow,
24/7 for actually 29 months and 7 days. I mean, I counted the time. And it was really during that time that I had my encounter with the Lord. And I tell people all the time, I didn't come to Christ easily, Clayton. I studied for 3 years every faith. I had my wife send me in over 400 books. I had my Bible. If you see my prison Bible, there's more of my notes on there than there is scripture. I mean, I just read it with a hunger to find out if it was for real. I always tell people, I'm a cynical guy. You go up on the street, you're not going to sell me a bridge if I'm paying attention. I want to see the facts. I want to know it's true. I want to verify. And that's what I did in my understanding of my faith. I mean, I looked into it inside out and upside down. I studied every faith out there. And the only one that made sense to me, that rang true, that I was able to corroborate, was Christianity. And I came out of prison just really surrendering my life to God and saying, look, I don't know what I'm going to do. There's no blueprint for me to survive in this life. If my former associates want to get me, I don't know that they can't. I said, I don't sell them short. And God just navigated this path for me. I kind of surrendered. I became obedient at some point in time. I didn't have a real plan, but he navigated this path for me over the past 15, 18 years that got me to where I am today. And I don't claim credit for it because it's not what I laid out. It's not what I expected, but he strengthens my faith almost on a daily basis because the fact that I'm alive and free to talk about it, I don't know of anybody that reached the level that I reached in that life and publicly walked away without entering a program or doing anything like that and really lived to talk about it like I do. And again, I don't claim credit for that because I didn't have a plan to make this work out. I guess the only thing I can claim credit for is having faith. Yeah. And saying, you know what, somehow this is going to work out, and trusting in God.
Yeah.
But it's been a remarkable ride for me. I thank the Lord every day. There's so many things have happened in my life, the opportunities that have come to me now. If I had struggles, absolutely. I mean, this wasn't easy at all, and the baggage from my former life doesn't go away that easy. My father is still in prison at the age of 98. He went back into prison. He's still a member of that life in some ways, even though he's elderly. My brother, almost put me in trouble a few years ago. My brother's a street kid. He never made it, in our life really, but he was on the street and he did some bad things. He was a drug addict. He tried to get me involved in it. Well, my brother's now in the witness protection program. He testified against my father in a prior trial. He tried to put me into it. I've had some other encounters. So, this stuff doesn't go away.
Yeah,
that's why I'm saying the Lord is faithful, and He's had this veil of protection on me, at least up to this point. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow, but up until this point, it's worked out.
In just a moment, we're going to be back with Michael Franzese, former mafia boss, and now a man who is following Jesus in what he does in life. A truly remarkable story here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand by sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielan. More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week, and with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
Can you grab a peace in your life at any stage in terms of, there seems like you've got a peace in yourself and with God and the ability to move forward in that sense. But are you always, even sort of, 15, 16, 17 years later, always looking over your shoulder, or has that subsided somewhat?
I don't look over my shoulder, but I can tell you what does happen. My wife, she tells me there's nights when I'm definitely fighting with somebody, and it happens quite often. Maybe demons from the past, maybe things come out when I'm sleeping. I don't know. I don't live in fear. I'm not. I don't take things for granted. I don't sell my former associates short. But when I left the life, I think it was very difficult for me because even though I knew it was the right thing, I felt horrible. I felt like I was betraying my father. I felt like I betrayed my oath. And it took me years to get over that. Even though I knew it was a bad life and I was doing the right thing, I still had a hard time dealing with it, Clayton. I know it's hard to understand because you never want to betray anything in your life, good or bad. And I had a real struggle with that for a long time. Maybe it comes out at night, but I want to tell you something that's really you'll see the power of God in this. The night that I got made, 6 of us were made that night, and I'm the only one alive. The other 5 were all murdered. In 1986, Fortune magazine wrote a huge article, the 50 biggest and most powerful mob bosses in the country. And it was half the magazine, and they highlighted 6 of us in that article. I was one of the 6. On the list, they actually had a chart or a list. And on that chart, out of the 50, I was listed as number 18, most wealthy and powerful. I was the youngest guy on the list. I was 5 behind John Gotti at that time. And, the list really was nonsense. I mean, they don't ask people for their tax returns when they make a list like that, but it sold a lot of magazines. I always say that. I don't know how they made that list, but it sold a ton of magazines, very popular magazine article. Well, that's not significant, but here's what is significant about that as it applies to my life. That was written in 1986. Today, out of the list of 50, 44 of them are dead. 3 of them are doing life in prison without parole. And I'm, around the country and now around the world, really preaching the word of God as it pertained to my life and what he's done for me. So, there's got to be something to it. There has to be something to it. And I believe God has protected me up until this point for this purpose. And again, you never know where it's going to go, what it's going to lead to. I don't foresee the future. I'm not a prophet. But I think God had a different purpose for me that he's having me fulfill. And I'm just thankful for it, and I just move forward one day at a time.
Back to that question I asked, I suppose, at the start in regards to what was your purpose in life in the middle of, being a part of the mob. And you said it was just sort of robotic and it was just doing life there. The same question for you now, and maybe it sort of links with sharing your story to others too. What do you see your purpose is in life and the reason that you're here and doing what you're doing?
Well, there's no doubt that my purpose is to be an encouragement to people and to give hope to people that think that their life is in such a shambles, that they can never recover, that they can never come back from a bad situation, that they could never be forgiven for a sinful life. I always say, look, at one point in time, no matter what audience I speak in front of, and last week I was in front of 27,000 people. This past Sunday, 6,000 people. So I'm speaking to big crowds, and I tell them at one point in time, I can say with, pretty well confidence, I was the worst guy in the room because I was a knowing and willing sinner. Nobody pushed me into the life. Nobody forced me into it. I didn't have any kind of addiction or any problem. What I did knowingly and willingly. Even if at times I thought it was wrong, I did it anyway. I said, and if this turnaround can come in my life, okay, what are you worried about? I mean, this can happen. If it happens to me, okay, who might have been the worst of the worst at one point in time, it can happen for anybody. And the story really resonates. And, I don't go out and preach to people. That's not what I do. I'm not a preacher. I'm not trying to impose my faith on anybody. I'm not trying to turn anybody into a Christian. I'm just telling my story. And, that's a big part of it. The mob story is huge because I spent so many years in that life. My father had such an impact on me. The life had such an impact on me. I took that oath very, very seriously. I really did. I mean, I wanted to be the best possible guy I could be. I was a good soldier. I was a good captain because that's what I wanted to be. I mean, I was loyal at that point, and I wanted to rise to the top. And I, as a result of the money that I was making, I was involved with bosses of all the families. I really got around. So, I mean, I knew the life intimately well. I was very active in that life, so it's a major part of my life. But now my faith has become a major part of my life. So the stories really intertwine. And, I also tell people, too, you're struggling in your life now. God will use, the circumstances that you're going through now to fulfill his purpose later on. So even though you might be in a bad struggle, a bad situation now, like I was, God will use those experiences for your life later on. And, I want to make it clear, too, in this thing in Melbourne that I'm doing in Sydney, and I'm actually doing 2 secular engagements, and then a number of churches, have contacted me to come and speak. But, I'm not there to preach anybody. They're going to hear a mob story. I'm going to answer every question that they have thrown at me, and believe me, I've heard every question under the sun. They're going to get an experience about what this mob life is really like, and from a guy that lived it and knows it as well as anybody. I mean, I interacted with the mafia from Italy, which, by the way, Clayton, the mafia in Italy and La Cosa Nostra in America, they're 2 different organizations. If you take an oath in Italy, you're not automatically made in the United States, and vice versa. And when people from Italy would come over, I dealt with a lot of Sicilian guys. We were courteous to them, but we didn't share our secrets to them. We were respectful, obviously. So there's a whole different dynamic going on there. But I knew them intimately well, too. So, there's a lot. They'll hear firsthand experiences of my life, and I'll answer all the questions that they have thrown. I've been hit with every question under the sun, and I answer them. I don't shy away from anything. So, hopefully it'll be a good experience for all of us. I mean, I'm received very well here in the States, and I'm hoping the same thing happens in Australia.
One final question, and then we will let you go. We do appreciate you for your time, and, I'm sure a whole lot of people are going to enjoy listening to you in person as you do come to town. And that's this. It's about your father. Obviously, you've had a very different relationship to perhaps most people's relationship with their father. As he is, 98, as you said, he's in prison. I think he's the oldest prisoner in the States at the moment as well. How do you emotionally deal with, as he's obviously getting towards the end of his life at some stage, is there an emotional time that you need to still sort through about what's happened with you and your dad and where you are, or is that something that has been sort of sorted already for you?
No, well, let me start by saying this. I love my dad. I'll always love my dad. Even when he betrayed me, I loved him because, in a weird way, and my wife has difficulty with this because she was, the FBI told her, your father-in-law went along with the contract on your son, and that was very hard for her to accept. But I understood because I knew my father proposed me into that life, and the thought process back then was that I was going to start testifying against people because nobody ever did what I did, so they didn't understand it. They figured that I would be testifying. The FBI, putting pressure on me, actually did put my name on the witness list of trials that were going on. So I was telling people, I'm not going to hurt anybody, but nobody really believed me. So my father was in a tough spot, and I didn't want him to be in trouble for proposing me into that life, and then he might be responsible if I were to do anything to hurt anybody. So I understood what he did. I wasn't happy about it. It hurt because I was always very loyal to my dad. I mean, I fought hard to get him out of prison. But I understood. And I didn't love him any less. When he came out, I was a little disappointed early on because, I held him in such high esteem, and I didn't see that in him when he got out of prison. He wasn't the same guy. And I was hopeful that he would be, but I didn't see that. And, then when my mom passed away 3 or 4 years ago, after we patched everything up, my mom passed away, and they had a very bitter relationship between them. My mother really blamed my father for all the stuff that went wrong. And, she was 33 years without a husband with all the time that he did. So it's rough for a relationship, obviously. And, she said some things to me that just didn't sit right with me about him. And so I've had some trouble dealing with that, but and honestly, I feel bad. I haven't visited him as much in prison now as I should, only because, Clayton, honestly, I'm so burnt out on the whole prison deal. I mean, I've either been in prison myself or visiting prison since I'm 5 years old, and the visit now with my father is not at all pleasant because he's in a wheelchair. Honestly, I know, don't want to be offensive, but every 20 minutes or so, he has to use the restroom, and when you have to use the restroom in prison, it's a whole ordeal. You got to wait for the guard to bring you in. You got to wait to come back. So I'm sitting there most of the time alone, waiting for him to come back in, and I just don't like seeing him like that. So I've been a little guilty in the past year of not seeing him as often as I should. But he and I are the only 2 left. I mean, my family's been wiped out. Yeah. I do struggle with it. I really do. And my father is he's a strange kind of guy. By the way, he's not only the oldest living inmate, well, the oldest inmate in prison in the States, He's the oldest made man in America.
Wow.
My dad's been part of this life for over 66 years. He goes all the way back to the days of Luciano and Costello. I mean, he's a living legend in this life. And, so it's tough. I mean, this life is just not good on families. It's not good on relationships. It's hard on everybody, Clayton. It really is. It's just tough to deal with.
Absolutely. Michael, it's a privilege to chat to you. As I said at the start, your story can inspire, I think, so many, and you've done just that. And I hope anybody who is perhaps going through some tough stuff and thinking, look, God can't ever love me, or my life's beyond repair, that there is hope. And I think your story does just that. Thank you so much for giving up so much of your time to chat to us today.
Well, thanks for having me, and I hope we get to meet when I get out there.